My name is Michael Guyad, publisher of The Lead Lag Report. Joining me for the hour is Steve Adcock. Steve, you've got a really interesting perspective and story on things, but introduce yourself to the audience. Who are you? Talk about some of your journey to becoming well off and financially independent, and what are you doing now?
Sure. Yep. My name is Steve. I've been on Twitter for, well, probably too long now. I worked a 14-year career in information technology, and that's one of those careers that you get paid a lot of money. You get paid really well, but it also drains the life out of you. At least it did for me. Um, so when I was about 20, I don't know, 30 years old or 30 years old, something around there, I came to a bit of a fork of the road. I had to ask myself some big questions, like whether I can continue doing this job, this career, this soul draining career for money for the rest of my life. And ultimately, I decided that I just could not do that. I didn't necessarily put the pieces into place right then when I first made that decision, but I knew that this was not going to be the journey for me. But I used all of that income working in technology, uh, really in it for the first half of my working life. It sucked, man. It really sucked. I was one of those big spenders and the big earners. So I would spend the majority of what I made, and that is absolutely not how you build wealth. That's the wrong way to do it. But once I finally started to realize how much wealth you can build if you just start making better decisions with your money. And that came after lots of trial and error, lots of practice, lots of mistakes. But I eventually got there. I got into this rhythm, this routine that really helped me build wealth quickly. And then, of course, when I met my wife, who also worked a full-time job in information technology, boom, that was a huge, I guess, advantage for both of us, because we can, with two IT salaries, that adds up real quick. And if you're smart with that money, I mean, you can really design a lifestyle that works the best for you because you have the resources to do it. But the most important thing is understanding what you want in life, and then understanding how to put the resources that you earn at your 9 to 5 job, or if you run your own company. Quite frankly, it's the exact same concept. You really have to understand what you want out of life, and then understand how to put the resources that you're earning to best use, so you can actually accomplish those goals.
Okay, so there's a couple of things here which actually relate to a recent conversation with a friend of mine, but this idea of knowing what you want in life is hard, right? In the sense that ideally you want to know what you want in life before college, right? Because depending upon what you want in life, right, it might dictate what degree
Exactly.
you go after or what job you want to go after, right? So, but you never really have in our education system a focus on what those real goals should be outside of graduating beyond sort of the fun of being, at a university. So talk about that process of figuring out exactly for you how you went about that self discovery of what you wanted in life, what you valued.
Yeah, I think one of the worst pieces of advice ever in the history of the world, especially after the advent of you're going to college and you work a career. One of the worst pieces of advice I've ever heard is follow your passion. And the reason for that is, when we pick the rest of our freaking lives when we're 18 or 19, like, we are setting ourselves down this trajectory now, right? We get a career, we get a job in whatever that field is, but we have no idea. We hardly even know ourselves, much less what we want to be doing for the rest of our lives. And the problem is, when we follow our passion, we're kind of pigeonhole ourselves into that career field. And I think that a much, much, much better way to think about this is follow your strengths. Because as we go through life, our passions change. And if you got a degree in a passion that you no longer care about, well, guess what? It's going to be that much harder for you. Um, to find yourself in a career that matches, whatever passion happens to be, what you want to follow this year. It was probably different last year or different 5 years ago. But Our strengths, I mean, yes, our strengths can change and morph over time, but the important thing to remember here is our strengths tend to be a little bit more technical, more analytical, more, numbers and organization and math and science. They may not be our passions like photography and art and woodworking and things like that, but those things, the the market wants to pay for what you're good at. The market is not going to pay you because you like to do something. It's not going to pay you because you have a passion for this subject or that subject. They're going to pay you for what you do well. So I think from the very start of your quote unquote career, which for most of us, or I guess for a lot of us, I'll say, not most, but for a lot, includes college, what you really have to do, I believe, is focus on your strengths first, because those are going to pay the bills. Your passions may not. So for me, my passion was photography, but my strength was computers, was information technology. So naturally, I got a degree in information technology. And that's such a broad category, right? That I could work almost anywhere in technology, anywhere, which is such a motivating, I guess, factor in how I started my life. Just this high paying career trajectory from the very beginning really set this, really put these pieces into place in terms of my income. And that's really where all this starts, your income. Um, but I mean, I really shudder to think if I majored in something like photography or an art degree. I mean, yes, you can make money with those types of degrees. You absolutely can. People do it all the time. But quite frankly, the numbers are against you. They, I mean, it's just that simple. The numbers are against you. So focus on your strengths. That's what I did, and I think that's what's going to give a lot of people the ability to put their best foot forward into a high paying career trajectory.
No, I like that a lot because I think there is this romanticized idea that you do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. And I never fully believed in that because that assumes that your expenses are zero. Like, of course, right? It's like it's ultimately a function of again, what kind of life do you want to lead? And that point about strengths is also important because, as I'm sure you've seen, Steve, there's a lot of organizations, a lot of people that they tend to want to improve or make their weaknesses less weak rather than accentuating the
The
strengths,
strengths. Yep.
right?
Yep.
But that does bring with it a question of how does somebody who wants to achieve a certain lifestyle even really know what their strengths are? Because there's an element of it that's you can argue that you're born with, right? Some people are naturally good singers, right? Because it's the way their vocal cords project, right? Some people are naturally good mathematicians, right? So, but they may not know that until they actually walk a path and see if what the strength is. So how do you think about that discovery process of what one's strength is?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's going to look different for all of us, but I think as you're going through school, your primary school, your first through 12th grade, I think that's probably going to be your best indication of what your strength what your strength is. Not necessarily the classes you like the best, but it could mesh, it could coincide pretty closely. But the subjects that you're the best at, you're just naturally good at, I think that's going to be a really, really good indication of what your strengths are. More and more now, I mean, there's computer classes in practically every school out there, and there certainly was even when I went to school in high school, like in the late '90s. There were computer classes there, and I really excelled at those classes. They didn't necessarily, I mean, it wasn't the most glorious thing that I can imagine doing, just sitting in front of a computer all day. But I also recognized that there's a lot of money, quite frankly, to be made in this kind of career. So what I'd like to encourage people to do is start from what they're good at in school as an indication of what they might want to do, later in life, what they're good at, not what they like. This is very, very important. Not their passion necessarily, but what they are naturally good at, those subjects where you don't necessarily have to study as hard as somebody else because you just get it, right? You just get it. And then take that subject, which is probably going to be fairly open-ended, like math or science or even a language, right? And look at these different career fields, look at majors in colleges if that's your plan, and try to pick a major if you are going to college that has the highest paying career options and the best career I guess a high paying lasting career trajectory. And for me, it was pretty easy because I mean, computers. That's a fairly clear cut thing. But if your strength is math, for instance, I mean that alone could open up so many doors. You could major in math, yes. But guess what? You don't necessarily have to. You can major in computer science or information technology or even accounting or economics. There's so many different types of majors for what your strengths is or for what your strengths are. So I would really encourage people to take a look at the majors, the degree programs that correspond with your strength and try to prioritize them based on your income potential. Now, you might be hearing this and thinking to yourself, well, life isn't all about money. You have to enjoy yourselves too. You can't work a career that you just despise every single day. And you know what? I 100% agree with that. If there's something that you just cannot fathom you would ever do, then yes, that's probably not going to be the career for you. But I think that for most of us, our strengths are open ended enough where we can probably find a path forward in a way where we're finding the best career trajectory, but we're also, comfortable with committing ourselves at least to some degree down that path for the first at least 5 or 10 years of our working lives.
I kind of feel though you need to have almost like educational reform to push that way of thinking, right? Because it's like, yeah, listen, I had a college counselor from high school, right? I mean, but it never really kind of helped me think in the terms that I would, knowing what I know now, I would have thought in terms of direction, career, where to put my energy and focus. So, I mean, a lot of this does come from one's upbringing and educational institutions. How do you think that if in the ideal world, what is it that you think schools should be doing to get people to focus on these kinds of things? Because even things like the student loan crisis and all this, it does stem from, I think, a lack of real awareness of what happens after college.
Yeah, I mean that's a good question, but it's also a really tough question to answer. I think a lot of guidance counselors in high school ask their students what they want to do, but maybe the question that they should be asking their students is what do you think that you need to do? What do you need to do? And the answer to those questions can absolutely be different. But when we're that young, I mean, I'm trying to put myself into that position, like thinking back when I was 16, 17, 18 years old, and somebody asked me that. I don't know what my answer. I really don't know what my answer would be, and I really think that I don't think guidance counselors in high school are doing that bad of a job necessarily because the people that they're working with are so young. They really don't have they don't have experience in the professional world, working a full-time job. They just don't. So it's like, on one hand, yes, I do believe we should be doing a better job, but on the other hand, I think for the most part we're kind of doing the best job we can. But I mean, that's kind of where I am coming from with getting involved on social media and some other platforms, is being that other voice, giving kids and really everybody just something else to consider, something else to think about, where it's not just about what you want to do, but it's about what you think that you should be doing. And those are two very, very different questions with potentially different answers. But yes, I mean, it's a very loaded question. And boy, I don't know if I have a good answer for it, to be honest with you.
In terms of your, and I'll go to some of the audience in a second, but in terms of your path to that financial dependence, it sounded to me as I was listening to some of your prior conversations that it was really because you had a very low expense base, right? That it was not so much that you necessarily had a super high income, but rather that you had super low expenses. Do you find that the key to financial independence is less about how much you make versus how much you keep? I know that's kind of cliche to say, but the expense point I think is more in our control than our investment portfolios.
Yeah, and that's something that I've talked about a lot, where this is financial independence or financial freedom is a two-prong, I don't know, kind of monster, right? One is, yeah, your income, maximizing your income, making as much money as you possibly can make. That's great. That's wonderful. But there's a lot of people out there, and I do mean that literally. There's a lot of six-figure earners out there who live paycheck to paycheck. And I want that I really want that to sink in. There's high income earners out there who are still living paycheck to paycheck. And that is because they haven't adequately addressed the other side of this, which is controlling your spending. Now, it's true that there's only so much money that we can save, so much money that we can invest, while still feeling like we are living a productive life where we're not just always working or eating ramen noodles and rice for dinner every night. I mean, yeah, there absolutely is an element to that. We can't live our lives in such a way where they feel like a sacrifice. We absolutely can't do that because that's not going to be a long term solution. But on the other hand, there's a lot that we can do to cut back on the things that we're spending on. I mean, I would encourage everybody on this call to open up a closet or maybe their garage door and think to themselves about this very simple statement. All of that stuff used to be money. Or all of that stuff could have been money. All of that stuff could have been investments. And are you really using all of that stuff? And I was absolutely in this category as well. I was a very heavy spender, like I talked about before. So I am certainly, I was never really an expert in this particular field until I achieved financial independence. But I think it first begins with tracking your spending. And this process sucks, man. It really does, especially if you're first starting, like going through the bank statements and credit card statements and really figuring out where all of your money is going. Categorize all this stuff to food, restaurants, clothes, rent. All of these things you can just categorize every expense for a couple months. Then this is where the magic happens. Then you can really start to pick out, like, holy crap, I'm spending $1,000 a month on clothes. This is ridiculous. I had no idea I was spending that much money. And that is where all of this starts. You need to track, you need to categorize, and then you can start making way better decisions about where your money is going.
No, that's an important point. It's like, and that's $1,000 post tax, right? So when you
That's
start
right.
factoring
That's
the
right.
pre tax, right, then it's like, wow, that's a bigger percentage. And I mean, the classic example, and it's like, I did this myself, right, coming out of college. It's like, I'm in New York, and one of the things you do when you're going to work is you go to a Starbucks, you get a latte, whatever. It's like but if you do that every day, $5 a pop, it's like, yeah, you can see how this stuff adds up, and it's insidious because you don't realize how, from a longer term perspective, that's not only a cost but also an opportunity cost.
That's right. That's right. There's that latte factor in play, but you know, I think that I really try to balance this. To saving money versus what's actually going to bring a legitimate smile to your face. And I don't want to tell people to get rid of all of those things because there are going to be some things that you just want to spend money on. The hell with savings. I mean, this really brings you happiness. So, I mean, if that $5 cup of coffee every morning like starts your morning off great, you're energetic with the caffeine and you just hit the ground running, you need that cup of coffee. Then you know what? The hell with it. Do it. But the problem is when that cup of coffee also means you're going out to lunch, you're going out to dinner, you're spending your free time on Amazon ordering more stuff. The problem is that cup of coffee is often not the only thing that you're just spending money willy nilly on. that is just like the tip of the iceberg. So I think that we really have to balance what really makes us happy, what brings a smile to our face, with the stuff that we're just spending money on because we think it makes us happy, but we haven't used this stuff in a month or 2 months or 3 months or even, a year or two. I think a lot of us will find ourselves in the position of, accumulating all of this junk that we're just not using, but we thought it was making us happy and it's not. So this really does take a lot of self reflection in terms of what really makes us happy versus what is just covering up for maybe a job we don't like or relationship problems or whatever that happens to look like to you. It shouldn't be a judgmental question that you ask yourself, but I really do fundamentally think that to achieve FI, that is an integral part of this process, is deciding once and for all what you are going to spend money on because it actively makes you happy versus the things that you're no longer going to spend money on because that was just a cover up for something else in your life.
There's an old. I used to be big on reading these when I was much younger. I was a nerd on some of the stuff, so I'd read these books on leadership, and I forget the exact book, but something that stuck with me is this idea that leaders make leaders of others, right? Which I think is a good way to frame that very point, right? It's like part of being financially dependent, Steve, and maybe you can riff on this a little bit, is not just looking out for yourself, right? Because if you want to build a business or you want to get a higher income, you also have to help those around you who are stakeholders to your own success.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'm never as happy helping myself as when I am helping somebody else. And I think that's very common with a lot of people out there. We are the happiest when we're giving back in some way, when somebody else is we're helping somebody better their lives. There's no question about that. But I also think the other side of that is we also can't take that to the extreme where we're sacrificing ourselves to help other people. I know that sounds really weird, but I like to call this healthy selfishness, which means the airlines already know this. We're putting on our oxygen mask before we help our neighbor put on theirs because guess what? We're not going to be of any help to our neighbor if we're unconscious. So if we take that same philosophy to life where we focus on building ourselves to the greatest degree that we can, whether that's financial, whether that's mental, whether that's health, whether that's physical, all of those things come into play. That puts us into a much stronger, much better position to be able to help those around us because we are healthier and we are stronger people. So that's kind of a two-sided coin, but I absolutely agree that when we help other people, it makes us like so much more confident, so much more motivated. And I think in the long run, I mean, easily when we're nice, when we're just nice, jovial people that are easy to hang around with and get along with, quite frankly, I think that is gonna enable a lot of success in our life. No doubt about it.
Yeah, no, and I want to go back actually to the point about the expenses, because I think this is everyone always says you got to control your expenses, you got to control your expenses. But you and I both know, Steve, that one of the biggest drivers of your cost of living is where you're living, right? It's your actual location. And, a lot of people would be better off financially if they moved from a major city to somewhere in the middle of the country that might be in a suburb where the standard and cost of living is so much less. But the problem, of course, there is that that's a really hard ask, right? You have your family, you have your friends, you have your history, your memories, where you are. So there does, I think, get to be a question of, do you choose financial independence by choosing to live somewhere else and having a new life where you're moving, or do you try and work harder, which may not get you the same result? So how do you think through that a bit? Because I think you live in Arizona, as I recall.
Yes, yes, that's right.
So talk about that, because I think that's always the dilemma with the idea of controlling your expenses, right? It's we all
Yeah,
know that we can downgrade our house or where we live and go somewhere else, but that's a hard decision to make for a lot of people.
yeah, it really is. And I think for I think for a lot of people out there, who live in a high cost of living area, I mean, I think there's a good argument to be made that for a lot of people out there, you're spending more to live in that high cost of living area than you are getting in additional salary. Now, it's not always going to be the case for everybody out there. There's no question about that. But I think for a lot of people, it is that way. And, I talk about this on Twitter a lot, and I'll get comments to those kinds of tweets by saying, well, yeah, it's more about money. I like the culture. I like going to concerts and things like that. And, quite frankly, I don't judge anybody who wants to do that. I mean, make your choices and live your life the best you can. If those kinds of things, going to concerts and living in a bigger city is worth the added expense and maybe pushing financial independence off a little bit into the future. I mean, maybe if it's 5 or 10 years, right? I mean, that's fine. If that's what you want to do, that's great. I'm not going to judge you one bit. But I would say that if financial independence is your primary goal, or at least one of your primary goals, I really do think that your cost of living, which starts with where you're living, is a very important question to ask. For me, I didn't. I mean, that was my top priority. So I moved around the country until I found a place where, I just felt comfortable with my income potential as well as my cost of living. And there are a lot of areas around the country and the world where you don't have to live in like a New York City or a Chicago or an LA or one of these big, high cost of living cities in order to make a lot of money. And that's especially true now as the remote work options become a little bit more prevalent. You can potentially get a job at one of these higher income places and then move to a low income area or low cost of living area and really start to bank that cash. I mean, that is when it really adds up quick. Um, but I think the biggest pushback here that I get from a lot of people is if they move to a low cost of living area, they're not going to be able to work their high income job. And that is a real criticism, and I understand that. And quite frankly, it's valid. It really is. But I think that if we do the math here and figure out what we are spending based on what we're earning, and we can compare that to a lower cost of living area, even if you do have to take on another job that pays less, if it pays 25% less, but your expenses are 50% less, guess what? You are in the end, you are saving more money. You have more money available to save and invest and build wealth. So it's not an easy question to answer. Moving to a low cost of living area is not going to be right for everybody, but that is absolutely what I did, and that is what really skyrocketed our investment potential for sure.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, at the core, it's sort of knowing the value of a dollar. But I think this is also a challenge, right? Especially as it becomes easy to double click the side of your iPhone to buy an app to spend $2 on something. I mean, there is this. It's harder to really know the value of the dollar of a dollar when it's so easy to spend it, right? I think that's a whole nother dynamic, which goes actually directly to your discipline point. So, Steve, going to you, speaking about habits of those who get the wealth and keep the wealth. Um, the question of how do you stay disciplined when you have money is really hard, right? I mean, it's well known, for example, that if the next generation that has money passed down to them from their parents tend to actually not end up keeping the money, right? Because they don't know the value of a dollar. But how do you think about that, and how do you keep yourself disciplined even though you know you've got a big cushion?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the important part to remember with discipline is you need to have a goal. You need to have something in the future that you are saving and investing for. It could be your kid's college education. It could be financial independence. Heck, it could even be early retirement if that's your thing. But I think that we are way, way, way more likely to save and more likely to invest when there is a reason that we're saving and investing. Before I put all these, financial independence pieces into place, I had no goals. I had no 5-year goals, 10-year goals, long-term goals. I had no goals. I had no reason to save. So I did save like the bare minimum, which was like 10% of my total salary. That's it, because that's what I was told that I need to do. So that's what I did. And I just spent the rest of my income. And the reason for that is because I had no reason to save. So I would really encourage people out there that if you do have a spouse, talk with your spouse about what your future goals are, exactly what they look like. I mean, you don't have to, get every single detail down. That's not the point here. But understand why you want to build wealth and why you want to save. Because if early retirement is your goal, or if funding your kids' college is your goal, and you get an opportunity to spend $10,000 a year on season tickets to a professional sports team, for instance, you might take a look at that and say, well, a year ago I may have bought these tickets because it looks fun, but my kid's education is more important, or my 10-year goal is more important than spending money on this particular expense. So I think that discipline, it's going to look different for all of us, and it's going to be easier for some of us than it will be for others. But for the vast majority of people out there, I have found your discipline skyrockets when you have a reason to save and you have a reason to invest. It really does come down to your future goals. Having that in place, that makes you way more likely to make the right decisions with your money.
Is it fair to say that the reason tends to be strongest when you're talking about family, for family members, like if it's for your son or your daughter or whatever it is? Because listen, I mean, everybody wants to have a nicer and bigger house, but it's not going to be the end of the world if they don't have it. But if you don't save for your next of kin, right? There's a much more serious attention, I would assume, in that goal setting if it's for someone else as opposed to for you.
That's right. Yeah. There's no question about that. I think that just that amps up the discipline even more. That you're not just saving to buy something, you're saving because somebody else's life depends on it. And when that's the case, oh boy, I mean, there's nothing that will stop you from saving and investing the money. When there's somebody out there that you love, their life depends on your ability to build wealth and achieve some level of financial independence, so you have the resources available for that person. I mean, absolutely, there's no question about it. That really, really just amps up the whole discipline equation, and it really helps you to consistently make the right decisions over time when there's another life out there who's depending on you.
No, no, but so actually that's a good conversation also around habits, right? Because look, long term value creation comes from the man in the arena or the woman in the arena, right? The person that's doing the fight, not the person who's buying the ticket, right? So to watch, which is what a trader does, right? And hopes that the fighter fights, and they enjoy it through profits. But it's a I'll turn that into a bigger thought for you, Steve, which is that presumably part of the dynamic of financial independence is having the right people in your life, right? Because if you have friends that are not frugal, you're probably not going to be frugal. If you have friends that are frugal, you're probably going to be frugal, right?
That's
So,
right.
right. So there is an element, I think, also of the ecosystem you choose to be in to get you closer to the financial independence goal.
Yeah, I mean, the people that you surround yourself with makes a huge, huge, huge difference. In fact, I think there was a Harvard professor. I don't remember when this study came out, but it was within a couple years, and he found that I think it was 95%, like huge astronomical number. 95% of your success comes down to those few people that you hang out with the most. And that I really have found that to be true. I write a lot on Twitter about ditching low value friends, and I get a lot of hate about that. But you know what? If financial independence is your goal, and in fact, even if it's not your goal, even if financial independence, you have no idea about it, you don't care about it, whatever, having high value friends is going to level you up. And what would I say a high value friend is? A business owner, but they don't have to be somebody who's actively improving their life in some way. Maybe they're maybe they're a fitness person, or it doesn't really matter what necessarily they do specifically. But if you can surround yourself with the people who have the same kinds of goals that you have, and you're all actively working together towards that same goal, it really is going to make everything so much easier, because you get to riff on whatever's going on in your life. You have this, it's almost like you have this collection of built-in mentors right there that you can ask questions to, and trade insight and things like that. But if you just have a group of friends who just like to go out to the bar and drink every night, or they're just big spenders, or you are going to, like you said, Michael, if you have spendy friends, you're probably going to be a spendy person too. If you have friends who just likes to drink alcohol, guess what? You're probably going to do that. But if you have friends who actively want to build wealth, to start a business, to get fit, to eat more healthy, you are going to do those things too. And this is a very difficult process, especially at the very beginning, to really survey the people in your life, the people that you call friends, and come to really ask yourself, is this friend actively supporting my ability to get to this end goal? And I'm not necessarily saying you just have to ditch all your friends and find new ones. That's not what I'm saying at all. You can still have those folks in your life. However, you really should have a group a group of friends who are, I just like to use the term high quality, because that's just a good all around, all encompassing term, that want something better for their lives and want something similar to what you are going after. So if you don't have that group in your life, in addition to your existing friends, I think you're doing yourself a grave disservice there. Yeah, that's a beautiful statement, Eric. And I mean, I really can't agree more either. I mean, it really comes down to changing the question from, what about this idea? What's wrong with it? What's bad about it? To how can we make this idea work? That just reframing of the question, don't tell me why it won't work. Let's discuss how it can work. Just keep things as positive as possible. Just that little bit of a tweak to the questions that you ask with your network, your network of high quality friends. I mean, that alone is going to really put the pieces in the place, in terms of like just riffing on all these ideas, and coming up with exactly, well, I hesitate to even use the term exactly, because you don't have to have details. You don't have to have, exact processes in place and exactly how you're going to do things. But the more ideas you have, the better. The more ideas you can try, and the more you fail, the more you learn, the more the better person you become with each and every failure. I mean, there's no bad, there's no downside to having a group of high quality friends. Yeah, I mean, if your goal is to make money, if your goal is to get wealth, if your goal is to become a millionaire, like you said, those are horrible goals. Those are really like soulless goals. You need to have something bigger and beyond that. Yes, money is going to help you to achieve that goal, but your goal alone can't just be to get rich. It really can't. That's going to be so unfulfilling.
No. And I'm loving hearing the interchange. I know, Steve, you said you had to wrap up, I think, 2 minutes ago. So, with that said, I'm going to apologize again for starting this space late. I'm really glad Eric joined to add some additional thoughts. Steve, really, I mean, I appreciate a lot your perspective. I think it's important for people to have the mindset that you have. And I'm sincere when I say that. It's, yeah, oftentimes people tend to focus more on the investing side, not on the personal growth, discipline, expense side, right? And that can be a bigger driver of longer term success than anything that you click buy on, right? So, um, any kind of final thoughts that you want to add to the audience before we wrap up here, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, what you were saying, the other side of that coin is it kind of personalizes everything that you're doing. Whether you're whether you're a day trader or you're an index fund investor, whatever you are, whatever however you're building wealth, understanding the other side of that equation, why you are doing this stuff, why you are going to work every day, why you are doing what you're doing. I mean, the ability to personalize everything that you do, it's really the psychology of money. And there's actually a book out there with that exact title. The psychology of money is one of those areas that too few people think about, because they're always so tunnel visioned on making more money, more money, more money. But you know what? That really becomes soulless after a while. But once you really understand the psychology behind why you want more money, where that money is going to go, how that's actually going to improve your life, those are hard questions. But man, once those questions are answered, the path forward is gets so much clearer, and you have this newfound, like, this, I don't know, this mission, I guess, this purpose going forward, and you're going to lead a much happier life. But Michael, thank you so much for having me on. I would love to do this again, to continue talking about these things. I had a lot of fun. Really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
No, thank you. Appreciate everybody. Enjoy the rest of your night, and I will see everybody hopefully on Sunday when I do two spaces, because even though I believe that's supposed to be the day of rest, I don't really pay attention to that. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Mike.